Hello learners, I am Ruchi Dubey from University of Allahabad, and in this session we will be discussing about the nature of learning. Learning is a very common term in our life, and in every walks of our life we are learning some sort of thing or the other. We cannot exist without learning, and in our life we pick up new informations, we learn new values, skills, habits, become self-confident, and all these things are evidences of learning. As teachers, our main concern is to enhance the learning of students. Let's start with an example. Suppose a child burn himself while playing with a burning candle. Next time, when he will see a burning candle, he will try to withdraw himself and he will learn to avoid all burning things. Thus, he learns that if he will touch a flame, he will be burnt. And he learns this by experience, though he may not be aware of this learning. So first, we will study about what is learning. Different psychologists have tried to explain learning in different ways. Like, according to Skinner, learning is a process of progressive behavior adaptation. According to Hilgard and Atkinson, learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience. Crow and Crow said that learning is the acquisition of knowledge and attitude. Gates and al. Said that learning is a modification of behavior through experience. It means that learning is actually a change in behavior. But every change in behavior cannot be attributed to learning. If a change in behavior is caused due to maturation or due to fatigue or due to a stimulus situation, then it cannot be termed as learning. Learning is actually a change in behavior due to experience or due to training. Now we will focus about the nature of learning. That means what are the features of learning. First thing is that learning is a change in behavior as a result of experience. Secondly, we can say that learning is a modification of both behavior and the way of perceiving. A person who lays emphasis on the external aspect, for him learning is modification of behavior or change of behavior. But for those who lay emphasis on internal aspect, they will consider learning as a change in the perspective of the individual. The third feature of learning is that learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior. The change in behavior caused by learning is neither too permanent as caused by maturation nor too temporary as caused by illness. Actually, learning lies in between these two changes, and that is why it is referred as a relatively permanent change in behavior. Another feature of learning is that learning is a personalized act of an individual. An individual learns what he wants to learn in his own self-interest. Fifth point regarding the nature of learning is that learning is an organization of behavior. While learning something new, a person actually tries to organize the behaviors related to it. For example, while learning cycling, the child tries to organize the behaviors related to it. That is, how to paddle, how to balance, etc. It means that learning involves reconstruction of experiences. The next feature of learning is that learning is a continuous lifelong process. A child starts learning from the womb of his mother and he continues learning till he dies. For example, Abhimanyu learned the art of Chakravyuh Bhedan from his father Arjun while he was on the womb of his mother. After the birth, the process of learning becomes faster. Learning is a universal process. All the living creatures on the earth have the ability and the capability for learning irrespective of caste, color, sex, geographical locations. Therefore, it is a myth if people say that the upper caste people have more learning ability than the lower caste people, And this is also a myth if somebody says that the women have inferior learning capacity than men. Next feature of learning is that learning is purposive and goal directed. Next thing is that learning is transferable. Learning of one situation can be easily transferred to another situation, and it is called transfer of learning. Another feature of learning is that learning is not always positive. It can be negative also. It means that it is not necessary that we always learn good things. We can learn bad things also. For example, a child can learn the use of abusive language by hearing somebody speaking abusive language. Next feature is that learning influences social, emotional and cognitive aspects of the individual. Learning depends upon maturation. It is the ability of adjustment. Then the scope of learning is said to be very wide and comprehensive, and it includes the cognitive, affective and psychomotor aspects of human behavior. Another feature of learning is that learning is both a process and a product. So, the nature of learning can be summarized as that learning is a change in behavior, learning is organization of behavior, learning is modification of behavior, learning is purposive, it is transferable, it is goal directed, it is a universal process, learning is a lifelong process, learning can be both positive or negative, it has a wide scope, and learning is a process as well as it is a product. Now, we will focus on how learning is a process. Regarding this point that learning is a process, different psychologists have different opinion. Like Hilgard, he said that learning is the process by which an activity originates or is changed through reacting to an encountered situation. According to Kingsley and Gary, learning is the process by which behavior is organized or changed through practice or training. Thus, it means that learning as a process involves organization of behavior. As I have already given an example that while learning to ride a cycle, a child has to organize the learning of turning the pedal, balancing the handle, etc. And similarly, while learning to ride a car, we have to organize the learning of changing gears, use of clutch, use of brake, balancing of steering, etc. Learning as a process includes the individual and his relationship with the environment. It means that learning is an interaction between the individual and the environment. Learning as a process refers to how do we learn or how learning takes place. An answer to this question is presented by different learning theories, and now we will be discussing the different theories of learning and what they said about the process of learning. The first is the stimulus response theory. The stimulus response theory states that learning takes place through association of bond between the stimulus and the response, and this bond is established either through reinforcement or through frequency. Trial and error theory of learning states that learning takes place through trial and error method. When any problem comes in the form of a stimulus before the organism gives different responses towards it, and from those several responses, the organism tries to select the correct response, and then he connects that response with that particular stimulus. So, a bond is established between the stimulus and the response, and this is called learning. Trial and error theory points out that the process of learning is gradual and there is no place of thinking and reasoning in the process of learning. The Gestalt psychologists believe that the process of learning depends upon insight, and learning by insight depends upon perception. Gestalt psychologists believe that learning is a sudden process and it involves thinking and reasoning. Bandura's observational learning theory states that the learning takes place by observing others. According to Bandura, learning is a process of acquiring new behavior or new responses by imitating or simply observing the behavior of other people, and reinforcement plays a very important role in observational learning. Pavlov's classical conditioning theory states that learning takes place through conditioning. Now the question arises that what is conditioning? Conditioning means getting a natural response from an unnatural stimulus. Pavlov has done an experiment on dog and he presented food, which is a stimulus, before the dog, and the dog salivated. Next time, before presenting the food, he rang the bell and again the dog salivated. This was repeated several times and finally it was seen that just on ringing of the bell, the dog started salivating. This is conditioning. This means that the dog has learned to salivate on ringing of the bell. Thus, the process of learning can be seen in two ways: learning as an associative process and learning as a process of reinforcement. Learning as an associative process states that the process of learning is through association of stimulus and response, and this association is established by two ways: selection and connection, and by conditioning. Another way of looking at the process of learning is by focusing attention on reinforcement. If a response is followed by a positive reinforcement, then the response gets fixated or learned, and if a response is not followed by a desired effect, then the response is not fixated. The next thing that we will discuss is the steps of process of learning. The process of learning has continuity and it is carried out in various steps like motive, goal, obstacle, and the learning situation. The first step in the process of learning is the motive or the drive. Motive is the force that energizes behavior, and an individual always tries to satisfy his basic motives. The second step in the process of learning is the goal. For the satisfaction of the motive, the individual has to set certain goals or aims which he tries to achieve. The third step in the process of learning is the obstacle or the block or the barrier that keeps the individual away from attaining the goal. It is this obstacle only which leads to bring changes in the present behavior. If there is no obstacle, then there is no need to change the behavior and will be no learning. An individual modifies his behavior only when there is a need to do so. That means an individual tries to modify his behavior only when there is an obstacle before reaching the goal. The fourth step in the process of learning is the learning situation or the environment available to the learner, and the learning situation provides the opportunity for learning. The quality, the speed, and the effectiveness of learning depends upon the environment of the learner. So, the first three steps of the process of learning, that is the motive, goal, and the obstacles, are the preparatory stages because they develop readiness and desire for learning among the individual. After the preparatory stage comes the actual stage of learning, which includes the learning situation. The process of learning depends upon maturation. Learning can take place only if a particular level of maturation is achieved by the learner. For example, we cannot make a child to learn a poem at the age of 1 year because at that time the speech is not developed or the child is not so matured to learn the poem. Thus, understanding of learning as a process is important because then only we as teachers can guide the learner in order to attain the goal and purpose. The next thing which we discuss is that how learning is a product. Learning is said to be a product because it results into some overt and covert behavior. Learning is the product of activity and the environment. It is the result of the individual response towards the stimulus present in the environment. If the individual does not respond to stimulus, he cannot learn. The product of learning can be seen in terms of change of behavior. If there is a temporary change in behavior, then it cannot be termed as learning. According to Petrovsky, learning is a stable, purposeful change in activity that arises as a result of the preceding activity. Learning as a product also involves modification of behavior, but this modification of behavior does not always indicate an improvement. Different theories have different answers regarding what is learned. The answer of the stimulus response theorists is habit, and the answer of the cognitive theorist is the cognitive structures. It means that according to the stimulus response theorists, we learn the responses, and according to the cognitive theorist, we learn the facts. Product of learning can also be seen in the form of achievement of a definite goal. Learning as a product can also be seen in three ways. First, memorized learning material with no understanding of meaning. For example, learning of poems or learning of mathematical formulas. Second, learning of simple concepts like 4 plus 5 is equal to 9. And the third is discovering and understanding relationship. Another aspect of learning as a product is that the product of learning can be seen in different aspects of human behavior. According to Bloom's taxonomy, there are three domains of learning: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor, and learning is seen in all these three domains. The cognitive domains involves development of intellectual skills. It has three categories: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Affective domain involves development of emotional skills, and psychomotor domains includes physical movement, coordination, and use of motor skills. It means learning brings about drastic and desirable changes in the human behavior, and these changes in human behavior are regarded as the product of the learning process. The main products of human learning are learning of simple responses like once burnt, the child will avoid candle. Learning of muscular habits like learning of cycling, physical games. Development of attitude, emotional response, problem solving ability, and language development. Thus, the products of learning or the results of learning can be seen in the form of change in behavior, development of habit, change in cognitive structure, and achievement of goal. Till now, we have discussed about the nature of learning and that how learning is a process and as a product. The next thing is, which we have to discuss, is learning as a psychological construct. Learning is said to be a psychological construct because the most important factors in the process of learning are the psychological factors like generalization, discrimination, facilitation, inhibition, integration, and expectancy. While learning, when an individual tries to point out similar elements between two situations and tries to formulate a general rule, it is called generalization. While, on the other hand, when an individual tries to point out dissimilar elements among situations and it also helps him in learning, it is called differentiation. Facilitation is also an important factor in learning because it is the human nature that simple and interesting things are easy and conveniently learned. Inhibition is an obstructive psychological element of learning because it inhibits the process of learning. Integration of whatever is learned plays a very important role in the process of learning. Learning is a psychological construct because learning has limits. Limits of learning refers to the capacity or the ability of learn, and it depends upon the individual differences of the learner. Learning depends upon motives, incentives, drives and needs, and all these are psychological concepts. Learning also depends upon the law of readiness. If a person is ready to learn, then he will learn faster, and if a person is not ready to learn, he will take a long time to learn a small thing. Learning means change or modification of behavior. Behavior means responding. But all behavior is not overt, that is, all behaviors are not observable. Reading, listening to music are also behavior, and this behavior is the basic datum of the psychologist. Next thing to be discussed in today's session is learning as a social construct. Learning as a social construct explains how people can learn new things and develop new behavior by observing other people. Learning is influenced by stimulations received from the physical, social and cultural environment. Learning is actually the interaction between the individual's intrinsic motivation, behavior and environment. Learning as a social construct can also be understood in terms of Bandura's social learning theory. According to Bandura, learning takes place through the process of modeling and imitation. Bandura's social learning theory emphasizes the role of observation in learning. The process of learning through observation includes 4 steps: attention, retention, reproduction and reinforcement. The first step is attention. Here, the learner observes the behavior of the model. The second step is retention, in which whatever the learner has observed is retained in his memory in the form of mental images. In the third step of reproduction, whatever has been observed and retained in the memory is converted into action. The fourth step is reinforcement. In this step, the imitated behavior is reinforced for continuation. Let's see it with an example. Suppose a girl watches a cookery show for the preparation of a new dish. This step will be the attention step. In the second step, she will keep the recipe in her memory, that is, she will try to retain it in her memory. In the third step, she will prepare the dish, that is, she will do the reproduction step, and finally, the response of the family member towards the dish will reinforce her action. That is, the response of the family members will be the fourth step. So, learning as a social construct includes observation of behavior and imitation of behavior. So, in this session, we have tried to find out that why learning is a social construct, why learning is a psychological construct, why it is considered as a process, and why learning should be considered as a product. Thank you.